Hello, my name is Kenney, and I've been a Rotarian for 34 years. I'm also an historian with Rotary Global History Fellowship. Now, I'm not at all nervous right now. It's just that I have a central tremor throughout my body, and I figure I'm rocking and rolling through Rotary. The best part is my head always shakes no. Otherwise, imagine how many more Rotary committees I would be on. Now, this PowerPoint presentation was developed after a number of years of research and interviews, and also presented at a number of district conferences. I wanted to make this free to everyone to be able to watch. I want to acknowledge Sandra Duckworth, who was the first person who put together a PowerPoint presentation and gave that to me to use to be able to further all my research. So, without further delay, I want to present to you The Mouse That Roared, the history of women and Rotary since 1911. It all started in Chicago in 1905 when Paul Harris, a lawyer, formed Rotary with other business people. They wrote their first constitution in 1906, and in that there was no mention of gender, just persons. They weren't planning to have women members. I should note that as part of this historic picture, one person was missing. Harry Ruggles didn't make it to the meeting. Most people would say that the addition of women to Rotary represents one of the single greatest forces in the growth of membership since the addition of international clubs. The first international club was formed in Winnipeg, Canada in 1910. Now, to really understand this, we have to go back in the past, and you really have to get your mindset around what the thinking was at the time. There were few women that were working, and especially few women professionals. Service clubs did not have women members, and this was a time when women were trying to get the right to vote. This movement took from 1848 to 1920, 72 years. The addition of women to Rotary took 76 years, from 1911 to 1987. The very first convention for Rotary was held in Chicago in 1910. There were 16 clubs in attendance, and this is where they formed the National Association of Rotary. Some delegates brought up the idea of having women auxiliaries, but it was rejected. In 1911, there were a lot more women entering the workforce, and especially professional women. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, a woman by the name of Dr. Gertrude Stanton formed an all-women's club on the objection of Rotary that had all the concepts of a Rotary club. She also was the president of that first club and the first optician that practiced in Minneapolis. In this picture, she's riding around in a car that she won from a newspaper contest. Over in Duluth, Minnesota, Irene Buell was creating a club also of all women that was in existence from 1911 to 1917. Now, Ida was the first lawyer to practice in Duluth, Minnesota. It just so happened that in 1912, the third convention of Rotary was being held in Duluth. There were 50 clubs in attendance, both from the U.S. and abroad, and this is where they formed the International Association of Rotary. Just prior to this, in England and Ireland had 4 clubs that brought before their board to allow women into Rotary or to allow them to attend the luncheons. They decided not to vote on that because they knew Rotary was about to go international. At this convention, there were several women delegates from the Women's Club, and Ida addressed the convention and made an appeal to allow for women Rotary clubs. It was rejected. Now, from 1914 going forward, there were many attempts, both at the Council of Legislation and board meetings, to allow for women's auxiliaries, but it was always turned down. The year was 1921 in Chicago, Illinois, and 4 pioneering women led by Alwalda Harvey, who happened to be the wife of the president of the Chicago Rotary Club. She got together the wives, daughters, sisters, and mothers of the Rotarians, and they held a luncheon. There were 59 in attendance, and they formed the Chicago Women of Rotary. Well, Rotary was totally opposed to that and told them they had to change their name. So they did what all good wives, mothers, sisters, and daughters of Rotarians would do. They totally ignored them. The membership grew to 250 members. And by 1923, when they decided to charter as a nonprofit, Rotary said, you must change your name to the Women of the Rotary Club of Chicago. Now, this auxiliary was made possible because in 1920, Rotary had come out with a supplement to their manual on procedures. And in that supplement, they officially prohibited women from becoming members of clubs or using the name Rotary in women's clubs. They did, however, sanction women's auxiliary clubs. At this time, one of the Chicago husbands from the Rotary Club there stood up and said, we have got to get up and promote ourselves, or by 1970, our club is going to be known as the Men's Auxiliary. I think it's important to read what Alwalda said, because this is a very good saying about what the women were doing at that time. I also want to read something from the Rotary Gyrator. The Gyrator was the newsletter for the Rotary Club of Chicago, and even though this wasn't written until 1934, it pertains. Regarding the place of women in the Rotary movement, the reason for the attitude of confirming the Rotary movement or confining the Rotary movement to males is much the same as the reason which sometimes impels businessmen to employ male stenographers or homely female stenographers. Fear of domestic complications. Rotarians are family men whose wives are homemakers and mothers. Further, these real women of Rotary would not look upon our organization with the same friendly interest were we to open our doors to those women who in recent years have felt that the call of business was of more service to humanity than the responsible occupation of home building. Over in England, Miss Addison Phillips was forming the Bristol Venture Clubs. And the Venture Clubs grew to about 151 members by 1923, and they started spreading into Europe. By 1930, the Venture Clubs merged with the Seroptimus Clubs, which had been formed in 1921 in Oakland, California. And this is one of the necklaces that the president would wear. Probably most everyone has heard of Rotary Anns, but did you know how that term came to be? It all started with the Convention for Rotary in Houston in 1914. The Rotarians on the West Coast arranged for a train to take all of them to this convention. And on that train was one woman, Anne Brunier, the wife of Harvey Brunier. Now, Anne was a very social person, so she was going through the cars meeting all the Rotarians. So they started calling her Rotary Ann. By the time they got to the platform in Houston, they hoisted her on their shoulders and they were yelling, "Rotary Ann, Rotary Ann." Well, the term stuck. And in Oklahoma City by 1928, the first Rotary Ann Auxiliary was formed. Now, history shows that they died out in the late 80s. But for any of you that travel in the U.S. or abroad, you know that Rotary Ann clubs still exist today. Over in Europe, a woman by the name of Marguerite Golding, she got together the wives of British Rotarians, and she wanted to form an auxiliary that didn't have a competing name with either the Venture Clubs or Rotary Ann. So they formed Rotary Wheel. They had their first meeting in the cooling room of Harriet's Turkish bathhouse. When asked later, why would you meet in such an unusual place? She said that was the only place we could get for nothing. Now, Inner Wheel grew to be one of the largest women's service organizations in the world, with over 100,000 members in 100 countries. In 1935, Paul Harris wrote This Rotarian Age, and I'd like to read from that book one thing that he said. He said, "I hope that the organization of the Rotary type now in existence will increase until the time arrives when there will be clubs for all business and professional men and women and youths who are imbued with the ideal of service." Further, the writer is convinced that women who can spare the time from family affairs need contact with other women more than men need increased opportunities to meet their fellows. Business provides men with contacts and also with the form of discipline of which women, by reason of their sheltered lives, are deprived. In 1949, in Salmon, Idaho, a woman by the name of Edwina Nichols took over ownership of her husband's car dealership. That made her the first woman owner of a car dealership in the United States. Her husband had died, and he had been a regular attendee at Rotary Club. So she just started attending Rotary in his place, and for years thought she was a Rotary member. When years later, the members were asked, why didn't you tell her she wasn't really a Rotary member? And they said, too many of us owed her money. Well, Edwina also had a grandson by the name of Jack Selway, and Jack founded Rotary Global History Fellowship. At that same time, in 1949, that was the first year that the Rotary Foundation admitted women to apply for applications for ambassadorial scholarships. From this time in 1949 forward, there were many attempts to allow for women in Rotary, but it always failed. The year was 1976, and the mouse that roared was about to be born. In the town of Duarte, 12 miles outside of the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, a small breakfast club of about 8 members decided to grow their membership. So they invited 3 women to come into the club, 2 principals and 1 psychologist. At the time, the district governor, Paul Bryan, said, when you send their names into Rotary, you be sure to only use the initials of their first name. So that's what they did, and the women became Rotarians. The problem is, the following year they were celebrating their 25th anniversary of the club, and an RI representative was in attendance. The cat was out of the bag. There they were, front and center, these women Rotarians. RI told the club, you must terminate the women's membership or you will lose your charter. The club decided to keep the women, and in March of 1978, their charter was revoked. It was also a time that there was about to be a council of legislation in Japan. So they wanted to make another attempt to get women into Rotary. They did a lot of fundraising in the community and bake sales to raise enough money to send Luke McJimpson over to Japan to make the appeal. They also asked Rotary to put this on their agenda. However, when Mr. McJimpson got to Japan, the vote that came before the membership was, did the Duarte Club violate the RI bylaws? And it was a resounding yes, 1,060 to 34. Well, the club went out and they had pins made with an X through them. And they renamed themselves the Rotary Club of Duarte, California. Here comes the roaring mouse. With the help of Stanford Staten, they went to he took it pro bono to the appeals court of LA against RI not allowing women into Rotary. This was not ruled on until 1983, when Judge Max Dukes ruled against them and against their notion that the Unruh Act applied to this. This club took this further and took this to the appellate court of California. And the appellate court ruled on September 16, 1986, in favor of the Duarte Club, citing the Unruh Act, which bans sex discrimination in the workforce or in any kind of employment. This affected the women that were just in the Rotary clubs in California. It did not affect anywhere else, just in California. At that same time, up in Seattle, the Seattle International Club, that had only been formed 2 years prior to 1986, they brought in 15 women all at the same time that became known as the Seattle 15. They also filed a brief along with the Oakland, California Club in support of the Duarte Club at the Supreme Court. Rotary had already gone to the Supreme Court of California to try to appeal this, and they refused to hear the case. So Rotary had no choice but to take this to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Seattle International Club also filed suit in federal court in Seattle against Rotary being able to revoke their charter. It is believed that Rotary didn't take them on because they were busy preparing for the Supreme Court case. It's interesting to note that in 1987, they came out with the Rotarian magazine that said, "Do women belong in Rotary?" In that, there are very interesting articles with the two opposing sides, yes and no, that makes for interesting reading that I encourage all of you to read. May 4th, 1987, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Appellate Court of California and the Duarte Club. The ruling was 7-0. 2 justices abstained, Sandra Day O'Connor and Harry Blackman. Sandra's husband was a Rotarian, and Harry Blackman was an honorary Rotarian. Now, this ruling affected all clubs and service clubs throughout the United States, not just Rotary. It also applied only to the women that were in Rotary clubs or would become members of Rotary clubs in the United States. I would like to read to you one thing that one of the justices said. Associate Justice Lewis Powell wrote for the court, "Indeed, by opening membership, to leading business and professional women in the community, Rotary clubs are likely to obtain a more representative cross-section of community leaders with a broadened capacity for service. Further, Justice Powell said that while Rotary clubs perform commendable service activities that are protected by the First Amendment, there was no evidence that these activities would be harmed by admitting women. The ruling at the court, however, did not apply to all the private clubs. So I will read you one thing from the private club. This was written by Stuart Taylor at the New York Times. And I quote, "The court did not define with precision how private and selective a club must be to have a constitutional right to exclude women, thus leaving the way open for other clubs to argue that they are more private than Rotary clubs." It's important to note that at that time, there was no federal law against sex discrimination by private clubs, so that is why it didn't necessarily apply. Some states, however, did have laws banning this form of sex discrimination in private clubs. As a side note, Augusta National Golf Club, where the Masters Golf Tournament is played, admitted the first 2 women in August of 2012, Condoleezza Rice and Darla Moore. 2 years later, in 1989, at the Council on Legislation, Frank Devlin, the RI president-elect, made a passionate speech pertaining to women being allowed to be members of Rotary. The council voted to eliminate the requirement in the RI Constitution that membership in Rotary clubs be limited to men. The vote was 75% in favor of the change. This allowed for women to become members of Rotary clubs around the world. Well, anybody in the United States back then knew of Irma Bombeck. She was a columnist who was always writing and was very funny about what she would write. So I would like to read to you just a small portion of what she wrote. And remember, this is only a few weeks after the Supreme Court ruling. On May 31st, 1987, women can pass on Rotary. As a woman, I'm here to tell you that joining a Rotary club is too high a price to pay for equality. I've spoken in parking lots and laundromats on behalf of women's rights, been patted on the head by legislators who advised me to go home and have babies. I have been picketed and cursed for my stand on the ERA, but feminists have gone too far. Don't ask me to infiltrate a Rotary club. Obviously, the women pushing on this issue have never been to a Rotary club meeting. I have. I'm going to stop there because it's available for you to see the rest of what she wrote on this presentation. In June of 1987, Rotary International sent back an invoice to the Duarte Club dating back to September 16, 1986. And they returned their charter. Nothing else, no letter, nothing else was said. At that time, Sylvia Whitlock, who was going to become the first president of this, woman president of this club, she attended PETS in March, just before the Supreme Court decision. And at that PETS meeting, there were 310 men in attendance, plus Sylvia. She said, when she got the invite, it said, "Be sure to bring a coat and tie." Also, at that PETS meeting, there was a session on the court case and the fact that they were going to the Supreme Court and would be ruling on that very soon. John Fee, who was the district governor at that time, stated, "It is just a case of the mouse that roared, a small club trying to change Rotary International." Well, Sylvia was in that meeting, so she went back to the club and she told them this would make a great motto. So they changed their motto to "the mouse that roared." And the banner on the left is the first banner that they had for their club, and on the right is the other banner that they have now. They also had little pins made with a mouse on it, which I'm very privileged to own one that Sylvia Whitlock gave me. When I visited the club to present to the Duarte Club, they told me they had developed a song back when this all happened. So I asked the club to sing the song for me. So this is the video that you're going to see for that song.
Good is sitting alone in your room. That's not how life should be. Come out to Rotary, my friends. Come out to Rotary. Duarte made history in the 80s, it's true. Service clubs brought women in. Supreme Court said let those women in. Now women and men serve too. We are the mouse that roar. All it takes is committed members to work to make things happen. So, turn off your emails and shut down the phone. They just bring misery. Come out to Rotary, my friends. Come out to Rotary. Come have a seat. Come meet new friends. Life needn't be so debilitating. Life is exhilarating. You'll be inspired by all that we do in this community. Come out to Rotary, my friends. Welcome to Duarte Rotary.
Sylvia Whitlock became the first woman president of any Rotary club in the world on July 1st, 1987, at the Duarte Club. She was already preparing to be president because they had ruled that women could be in Rotary in California. Sylvia said the day of the Supreme Court ruling, there was a 3-hour difference in time from the East Coast to the West Coast. So she didn't hear the news until she was driving to work and heard it on the radio. So when she got to work, there were many of the reporters and media there to interview her. They asked her to go over to the district office and be interviewed there. After that, there were many reporters that approached her, and she said that she remembers one in particular that asked, now that women are in Rotary, are the meals going to be better? She said, no, because we're not planning them. Sylvia wrote a book, Women Also Serve, and in that book there is a lot of information about her time as a president and also everything that happened during that time at the Duarte Club. Sylvia went on to be a past district governor. The second woman president of a Rotary Club was Carolyn Van Soest, and that was the Seattle International Rotary Club. Now, she had to travel around the district during that time and was visiting other clubs. And she said, this is some of the questions that she was asked during her presidency. 1, what will women do if you get pregnant and can't make the meeting requirements? 2, what will you wear to meetings, dresses or pants? 3, some Rotary wives are concerned that some of the single women in the club will have affairs with their husbands. Isn't this a concern of you women? In 1995, there were the first 8 district governors that were women. There was one when I interviewed all of them that had already died, and I interviewed her daughter, Mimi Altman, and she said that her mother had been bounced on the knee of Paul Harris when she was a baby. There are only 6 of these women remaining. I have interviewed 7 of them. Ironically, this picture is the only one that I could find of all 8 of them together, and it appeared on the Rotarian magazine in the Netherlands. I will go fairly quickly through these. These were the first women trustees of the foundation of Rotary. There were 9 of them. And these were the first women directors of Rotary. Elizabeth Dimmeray was supposed to become the first woman treasurer of Rotary International, but she died before she took on that role. There were a total of 17 women RI directors. The first woman vice president of RI was Ann Matthews. There have been 5 women vice presidents of Rotary International. The first women past presidents of Rotary International of Great Britain and Ireland, there were 4 of them. They came under a completely different umbrella for Rotary. They fall under Rotary International, but RIBI has a lot of different rules and their election of some of their own officers. This is a history all in itself. that I encourage all of you to read. In 2014, the White House invited 10 U.S. Rotary women to be honored for their humanitarian work. Well, we've come a long way since women were excluded from Rotary. As of February 1st, 2022, there were 288,309 women Rotarians, representing 24.19%. I'm sure that that number has grown even as I'm speaking. We've come a long way from the past. The mouse that roared is now a lioness. In the words of Doug Rudman, who's a Rotarian and a historian, he said, "If you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door." Rotary is a better mousetrap. We are no longer men Rotarian and women Rotarians. We are all Rotarians. So I close with this. The first woman Rotary International President, Jennifer Jones. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.